Let's talk about house elves. One chapter today, and that would be the House Elf Liberation Front, which is notably a better shortened name than Spew. The first thing I would like to do would be to speak again on a previous comparison I made, which was Harry to Socrates, which I made way back in I think it was Philosopher's Stone. Because that came to mind to me again, reading this chapter, though not directly a comparison of Harry and Socrates. Actually, what came to mind would be the writing of Socrates' most notable student, which would be Plato, and specifically one of his most famous pieces of writing, which would be the myth of the cave. The cave is actually a relatively easy on the surface image to explain. There is a group of people who exist and have always, as far as they can remember, existed within this cave. And they're sitting and they're facing forwards, and they've got chains around their ankles and around their necks. And they're facing a wall. And behind them is a fire. So there's light on the wall. And there is actually passing between them and a fire many things on a road, which are casting shadows on the wall. And they perceive, simply because it is all they've ever known, that these shadows, which they tell stories of, are all there is. Now, within the story of the cave, mysteriously one day, one person gets out of their chains and turns around. And he sees the fire and he's blinded. But he waits, and eventually his eyes get used to the fire, and then he's able to see this road. And the people carrying baskets and animals that are moving along the road. And he looks at it and he says, this is the real thing. But then he notices that the cave keeps going up. So he follows up until he reaches the outside, and the sun hits him and he's blinded. And the only way he can look at things is he has to look at the ground. And he finds a lake, and he sees everything reflected in the lake, and he says, this is the real world. But eventually his eyes adjust to the sun, and he's able to see around him, and he's able to look around him. And he says, this is the real world. But he can never look at the sun directly. He'll always be blinded by it. For that is Socrates' images of the good. It's the sun. You can never look directly at it. You always have to have something between you, or you always have to look around it, but you can never look directly at the thing that is real. But there are many stages that we go through before we can get anywhere near what's actually real. We go through a lot of images first. So why am I talking about the image of the cave? Well, it's sort of interesting because I can see it in this moment with the house elves. Just consider it. Literally, we have our 3 students going down into this underground section. It's not cold and wet It seems to be very warm and inviting, which is interesting because with the cave, of course, the notable thing in it is the fire. And they go down into this moment and they find this group of people who, for the most part, have never been much beyond what we're seeing here. We find out, of course, that there are house elves around the rest of the castle, cleaning everything up. When Hermione starts being a little more active about this, they actually stop cleaning the tower. But we are getting something of the image of the cave here. The thing is, the image of the cave actually continues. And it's a little bit of a concerning way that it does continue. The person that gets out of the cave and comes to know the world, but still can't look directly at the sun, decides that this is the greatest feeling in the world. And that everyone should feel this. Everyone should know the world for what it is. So he goes back down into the cave to the other people there. And he tries to get them to come. But he sounds so strange and so insistent that he frightens them. And they end up beating him to death. Do you see the comparisons that can be drawn here? Most notably with Dobby and Hermione. These are the people who have seen something else. But they don't know how to express it yet, and it's frightening the rest of the house elves. Dobby is the weird one. Every other house elf is scared of him, because he wants pay, and he'll speak poorly of his previous masters, and it's frightening to them. It's embarrassing. They think it's rude. They're afraid it's contagious. These are all words that Rowling herself is using to describe how these elves are responding to Dobby. And in fact, they perceive Winky's reaction to actually be more proper. She is upset to the point of being inconsolable. She'll keep Crouch's secrets even though he's let her go. She doesn't want pay. She's just as frightened of everybody else. So in fact, I think perhaps the image of the cave has been expanded here. I think we get the two different types of people. We get the one who gets up and sees the fire and says, maybe there's more. And we get the one that gets up and sees the fire and is just burned up by it. And is so frightened, and in that way keeps the rest from wanting to go and investigate. They want things to stay normal because that is what they know, and everything else is scary. Of course, in the image of the cave, it's the philosopher who gets out, and it's the rest of us who are in the cave. Because it's the philosopher that's willing to ask questions about the world around us, and even be willing to admit that maybe we don't actually know what's real. I think a lot of us like to think that we do, and we look at something like this and say, well, these are the shadows, and this is the world around me. But maybe it's not. And that's these house elves. They don't know anything else. They're frightened of the other possibilities, and they're frightened to follow somebody who says there might be other possibilities, simply because it's all they know. No one wants to be told that their entire worldview was wrong. But are we treating them right? I think that Hogwarts is certainly on the better end of the scale. But I am with Hermione on this one. The house elves are still a slave population. And it might take baby steps, but I certainly think that we could work towards a better situation for everybody. But it's going to take time. We do have to remember that, like I said, this is all they know. You can't suddenly change the system and expect things to go without a hitch. It frightens everybody because they don't know what else they can do. If you only teach a section of the population certain things, and then suddenly say, actually you can do anything, or at least reasonably anything, anything within these certain restrictions, they're still likely to go back to what they know. It's a very few of that population who are going to be able to go on and do something else. And eventually we could get to the entire population being able to do other things. But I think Hermione is right. But I think she's not necessarily going about it in the right way. Her style of revolution seems to be very much a people's revolution, but that requires the people to be aware that they are in a not good situation. So what you actually need to start doing is educating these people so that they are aware they're in a bad situation. Then we can have changes. Education all around. Except that's the hard bit, because neither side wants to talk like that. Except they can. Because we're already seeing Ron make some adjustments. I mean, all things considered, he looks at the situation and say it's always been this way. But he doesn't abhor Dobby for being any different. In fact, he offers him clothes because he knows Dobby likes them. Like, that was a step in the right direction for Ron. To not outright reject the person coming back down and saying, look, there is more to this world. Come and see. So yes, I think we can move towards a better situation with the enslaved population. In fact, did you notice that Dobby used the word enslavement in this chapter? Because he did. House elves can be aware that their situation is not good and that they deserve better. We just have to move forward at a pace that is not breakneck. We have to move forward with kindness. You'll see that in every situation with the house elves. Kindness is key. And this is actually a population that is going to be proved to be very powerful. So I mean, if they really wanted to just break out, I definitely think they could. But we don't want them to break out. We want everybody to move forward and leave a very broken system behind. And let all these races of magical creatures live together. But it's not just the enslavement of house elves that we're going to have to leave behind. It is this broken system of government. Like, we're going to see when we get into that place. Even the statue before Voldemort's statue, it's still very biased. So it is not just this one section of government that has to change. It's a lot of it. So let's go House Liberation Front. I'm with it. But let's do it with kindness. Let's educate people. Because kindness is going to win over violence. Violence just gets rid of the opponent. It doesn't prove you're right. Okay, so that's all for today. I'm going to keep reading, and until then, I hope you do too. See you next time.